Heather Skelley graduated from Towson State University in 1991 with a bachelor's degree in early childhood education. Mrs. Skelley taught in Baltimore County Public Schools for 7 years. She has also served as a professional developer for over a decade. In 2003, she came to Towson University as a lecturer in the Department of Early Childhood Education. These are her reflections.
Mrs. Skelley, thank you for sharing with us your thoughts about your teacher preparation here at Towson and your subsequent career in education. This will add tremendously to our understanding of the evolution of teacher education at Towson. Usually where we begin is at the beginning. So first I would like you to tell us a little bit about your early social context, where you grew up, where you went to school, what kinds of career thoughts you were having in high school, when you first thought about possibly becoming a teacher, and when you chose Towson as the school you wanted to attend.
Well, I moved around my entire life. My father was in the Army, so I, went to DoD schools in Germany and in cities in New Jersey, and wound up in Maryland because he was stationed at the Aberdeen Proving Ground. So I think in total I went to 5 different elementary schools. And then stayed in Hartford County for high school and middle school, which, is what just sort of, kept me in this region. I think as far as school goes, I was always really interested in history and the political science piece, and so I kind of had it in my head through high school that I was going to be a social studies teacher, a high school social studies teacher. And so I had started out, when I was in high school, my parents divorced, and so I started out at community college at Hartford Community. For financial reasons and such, but I was a history major there, thinking that I was going to transfer here, to finish as a high school social studies teacher or something in that area. And when I was in high school, a boyfriend at the time, his father was a principal in Hartford County and was just in dire need of a substitute, and asked if I would be interested in subbing for a first grade class the next day. I'm like, oh wow, I don't know nothing about that, but sure, I'll give it a try. And I went in and I just absolutely loved it. And I had been subbing in some area middle schools and things like that on days that I didn't have classes up to that point. So it was a big switch because I hadn't, worked with younger children before, and it was just so great. And so I let him know that, from there on out, I'd be happy to, sub for him if he ever needed somebody again. And so it started to become sort of a regular thing, and I wasn't taking the calls from the middle schools and the high schools anymore. And I just, I enjoyed it so much, and the kids really wanted to be at school, and it was just, they all just had such a need for being there, and it was such a great experience. So when I finished at Hartford, I applied to the early childhood program here at Towson, and so that's sort of what kind of made that switch. And
so at HCC, what kind of degree did you get?
I finished with an associate's in just the general studies because at the time it was sort of what I was told to do. And I have to say I did come here and take an entire semester worth of summer classes so that I could stay on on track with what I was doing. But I had pretty much stuck with the education and the history courses when I was there. It just wasn't working toward that specific degree that I think is is now in place for some of our transfer students that come in and so on. So
that's a difference, I think, in terms of programming here at Towson.
Absolutely, big switch.
So so you took summer courses to be ready to sort of start your 3rd year?
Yes. So there were some prerequisites, I guess, some things that weren't covered from the previous, community college experience that Towson required before I could apply to the early childhood program. That seems so long ago now. It's like I almost, I was just saying that to OC yesterday. I can remember when I used to stand outside this door and, have to wait for my permits, and, we were, thinking about the upcoming registration for students. So that's sort of what happened. Then I applied to the program, and consequently, Dr. Watson Thompson, who's the chair of our department, that was her first year here, and I was her first pre-primary cohort. So, she always jokes with me that I've never left. So that's, and then there we are. So,
do you remember, what do you remember about your education courses here? Did you have an opportunity to go into schools before you student taught? Do you think that your education courses were more theoretical or practical or a combination of the two?
When I think back to the seminar paper I wrote with you, I wrote a lot about balanced literacy and that shift in reading instruction. I think when I came through this program, it was during one of those shifts. We were moving from the phonics and the basals to the whole language, and so there was a lot of that was coming into our program, and but wasn't quite in some of the schools yet at that point. I had I wouldn't give it a lot of experience, but I'd done a lot of subbing prior to entering the program. So I had a fair amount of experience, I thought, as far as being in classrooms and just sort of seeing how schools worked in the day and things like that. I was in this little preschool daycare center up in North Hartford in Hartford County for my pre-primary experience. And I think about what our students go through now, and the kinds of things that they do in the PDS. It just seems so different. And then I was at Roland Park in the city for my primary experience in a first grade classroom. And then at that point I was able to student teach in Hartford County where I live, so I did the student teaching there.
And do you remember who your university supervisor was for that experience?
The name Mr. Lohman rings a bell. Very tall gentleman who used to come in too.
Right.
I remember the kindergarten kids looking at him like this when they came in.
It was wonderful that you could do it in your home county. Do you think that experience was very different from what our students get today in terms of the university connection for their student teaching?
I think a lot of our students, I know, I have these conversations all the time with my interns, really, a lot of our interns are from New York and New Jersey, so it doesn't matter to them within the confines of Maryland, where they're student teaching. But there's a lot of people who have that hope to go back to Howard County or Anne Arundel County or Carroll County, wherever they're from, and I know that they, interviewing wise, would, feel like if they had an experience there, they would have that, that leg up. And I think that, when I graduated from the program, it's sort of the same situation that it is now for students when they're graduating. Teaching jobs aren't as easy to get as they were 5 years ago, and so it really is sort of weeding out. And sometimes people are taking jobs in counties that they might not necessarily want to work in, but you want to work, and so we see a lot of that happening. I ended up teaching in Baltimore County, which was a fabulous experience, and everything worked out for me. But I took that experience in Hartford County thinking that's where I was going to be working. So,
So you finished, and you didn't go back to Hartford County, as
I
you
did
just
not.
said. So your first job was in Baltimore County.
Was in Baltimore County, actually through a project that was in conjunction with Towson University. It was the pre-K, Baltimore County pre-K Towson University. Pat Waters was in charge of it. I can't remember the exact name of it. But I was interviewed by a panel of people, Pat Waters, Tom Profit, and a few others in the conference room over in the Dean Suite in Hawkins Hall. And there was a handful of us. They had a pool of people they interviewed, and then from that pool they chose, I think, 10 or 15. And then we went over to, at the time I want to say it was the old administration building, and it was sort of a round-robin interview piece where the 15 schools or 10 schools or however many it was that were involved in this project, the principal from that school was there. And so we interviewed with each principal for a few minutes, and then, if they chose to, select somebody for a job, they called you back for another interview.
And they called you back.
And so I ended up going to Catonsville Elementary and being part of that pre-K project for the first year that I taught. So.
And then what happened next?
Well, it was a great project, and one of the questions I was when I was reading talked about mentors, and did you have a mentor? And with this particular project, it was really neat. It's sort of a shame that a lot of students don't have this opportunity because, Pat Waters kind of ran this, from the Towson end, and so as a first-year teacher, I had pre-primary interns in my classroom, which, when I think back now, wow. But, they came in under the supervision of Pat, and, so she wasn't only there just to support me, but to support them as well. And it was, it was a little hectic at times, but, the project was organized in such a way that we all got together once a month for dinner and things like this, and it was everybody that was hired within the project, and it was at Pat's house, and we made dinner and we talked about curriculum and units and just anything that was an issue as a new teacher, a student that you were struggling with, or working with parents that weren't communicating with you. I mean, it was just a really supportive environment, as a first year teacher, and then I ended up with the the contract with Baltimore County after that, and stayed in that school for several years. So,
do you remember anything else specifically about, we're sort of hopping back to your degree work, about the curriculum at the time, or was there anything, or you mentioned Pat Waters, anything or anyone who just sort of was tremendously influential when you started to teach?
Pat was one, I think, just because I had her for so many courses, and then the pre-K project. I remember, and I think about this because of the teaching reading course, and when we talk about some of the phonics pieces and just things that our students haven't looked at since they were in the second grade, and now, we're learning them again, but from the context of how you teach it. And I can remember that in Eileen Cohn's class and thinking to myself, why am I learning vowel diphthongs, and why am I doing this? And, and it was really that piece of not 2 + 2 is 4, but why is 2 + 2 4, and that sort of thing. So I think, the piece, and I think this still stands true to our department now. It almost seemed as if even if you weren't in one particular person's class, you were in everybody's class, because, as a department, we do so many things together with the all-ins, or we'll have all the pre-primary people together, or all the teaching reading courses together for something, and it seemed like there was a lot of that large group work in our department. I do remember that, Barbara Poor and, some of those folks just, it seemed like there was always lots of instructors in the room, giving their piece of this and that.
So one of the things certainly then was that this sort of collaboration
Absolutely
would be something that you saw.
Absolutely. And like I said, OC, was my pre-primary instructor. And I joke with her all the time because we had the Zahner Bloser handwriting book, and she made me redo it. And I remember I did it the night before it was due to her. But I can remember walking out of her office saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to redo a handwriting book. And so I joke with her about that all the time. Whenever she asks me to do something, I'm like, I already redid the handwriting book for you. So, it just seems so long ago, but I really, that collaboration and everyone really working together, that, you were in so-and-so's course, but it really was a piece of, everybody sort of working together. And, we didn't have the PDS relationship and those kinds of things that we have now with our interns, but certainly, as far as the department went in Towson University, I think that collaboration was there.
So how long did you stay in Baltimore County?
I was there for 7 years until I had Dylan, my son Dylan, and I had the intention of taking 1 year off and then going back. And then at that time, I was working on my master's in reading here, and I sort of fell into a staff development position via Sharon Pitcher with the Fund for Educational Excellence, otherwise known as Achievement First. So I ended up working for them for 2 years in a couple of different schools in Baltimore City, providing reading staff development, and that was a really, really great experience as far as just staying in the classroom and working in another school system and really pushing yourself professionally in terms of being able to disseminate things that, you're learning and know. And I was actually doing this as I was finishing the master's program, so I didn't necessarily have some of the experience that some of the others who were working for them at the time had. But fabulous. It was in that whole CEO initiative in Baltimore City when they were sort of, demographically breaking up different parts of the city and trying different things in terms of, moving students forward. And so I did that, and then that was the year that Baltimore City was financially not doing so well. And so that budget for Achievement First was dependent heavily on Baltimore City's budget. So I applied with Children's Literacy Initiative based out of Philadelphia. And that same year, I started to teach a graduate course for the Center of Reading Excellence at Johns Hopkins. And that just kind of spiraled me into sending my resume and things here, and just all the connections I'd made from the graduate program and, the early childhood program and things like that. I ended up teaching here as an adjunct for Greg Bryan and Terry Berkeley one semester, and then Terry hired me as a lecturer the following fall. So I've been sort of juggling both hats since then. And that was a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, no, how long was that? When did you come?
9 years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is my 9th cohort, the 9th year in this
Wow.
PDS. So.
And tell us about what you do now.
So now I am a lecturer for the Department of Early Childhood, and I am the liaison for the Middle River PDS. Hannah Cawley and I sort of run that PDS together, all schools in the southeastern area of Baltimore County. So we have Dundalk and Bear Creek, Sussex, Middlesex, and Hawthorne. And Sandy Plains is very gracious to take us on a regular basis because it seems like, you know, our cohorts are always exploding, and we're always looking for extra mentors. And so the PDS has been great. Actually, 2 of the 4 site coordinators are graduates from the early childhood program, and actually interns that were in my first cohort. So that's really great. And I had a presenter yesterday that was an intern from that first cohort, and, you know, as a mentor. So in terms of that PDS relationship and sort of why that is what it is and how that's supposed to work, I think we've really pushed that to make it work, you know, with the integrity that it was designed for and that we were kind of put in that place for. So
Can you tell us what some of those elements are?
well, I think really looking at the longevity of and sort of teacher retention, I know that that's a big factor in a lot of what we're doing, you know, with CPP and some of the things that we're talking about, you know, with just the shifts with, you know, race to the top and all of that good stuff. And just looking at, I think, you know, our students feeling more prepared because they feel the part of a school community, you know, because they stay in these schools and they have these relationships and we have these relationships. You know, when I think back to my experience in the program, you know, not that my pre-primary and primary instructors weren't there to observe and do those kinds of things, but I think, you know, we're a lot more hands-on with these PDS relationships in our schools than maybe when I had come through the program. And so, you know, when you've got somebody struggling or somebody who's stronger, you know, those kinds of things, we have, you know, the ability to sort of network and communicate and problem solve, you know, between mentors and the university and students and sometimes administrators. And I think there's a long-term sub-position in one of my PDS schools. And, you know, the principals come to us first, you know, when there's somebody that, you know, they need to hire. And so that's, you know, that's really a nice opportunity for students, even if it wasn't that particular school within the PDS where they interned. You know, there's enough people that have seen them teach and had, you know, interaction with the interns that, you know, you can say, you know, there was somebody that, you know, was at a school or at Sussex Elementary, and I'm recommending someone at Hawthorne. And, you know, I said to her, you know, you can call Tom Bowser. I'm sure he would be happy to give her, you know, a recommendation as well. And so I think that piece of networking and just being a real part of the school community sends them into that school community more prepared as a first-year teacher than sort of, you know, being here, being there, and then getting hired over here.
So now, at what point, tell us a little bit about the curriculum for these students. At what point do they start going into schools?
Our students go into schools from the point in the program where I teach. I start right with our professional program, which is semester 6, which is their pre-primary semester. So our program is a little bit different in the fact that it's sort of divided developmentally. So our students in their pre-primary semester are looking at pre-K and K classrooms. Their reading course is devoted to early literacy. You know, the assessment course is devoted to young children, those sorts of things. And then, you know, the primary semester is first, second, and third grade, and likewise everything is devoted to that age group. So they're taking curriculum courses, reading courses, assessment courses, you know, integrated arts and things like that.
And are they in schools at all during this?
They are in schools 1 day a week, and it's funny because we're trying to push that to be a little bit more. It turns out most of us are front-loading our curriculum course so that they can have that time in the field as well, because, you know, of the demands of the coursework, but also, you know, the demands of the school system. 1 day a week just doesn't, you know, always suffice anymore. And I think to keep them as prepared as they can be for student teaching, it's really hard to be a one-shot wonder and only be in there once a week and then come back and teach a math lesson and not have seen the 4 previous math lessons that your mentor teacher taught before you came, you know, back that day. So, and I think students are seeing this need to be in schools a little bit more. So we're really working toward that. This year, we're switching things around a little bit and revamping, so that things are aligning with the Common Core standards. And it seems like the interns, that's how we have them planning and looking at their lesson planning. And it seems like things are going okay for them so far with that. They're not like the classroom teachers who are shifting from one to the other. This is really all they know at this point. So, it's a little bit easier for them probably than people who are student teaching right now and have been planning with the Maryland State curriculum and so on, and having to sort of make that shift. So, same with the reading courses, just sort of looking at some of those things and how we're aligning everything so that students are most prepared, to go out into the classroom. And
well, it's difficult because it appears that there are so many different standards and expectations that you as an instructor have to incorporate, and your students have to know and have a sense of, and how they can work together. It is a bit overwhelming.
It is, and I think, there's always, it was funny because last year I was on a committee to look at the Common Core standards and how they were going to impact the English language arts standards and how they were going to impact our courses. And there was somebody from each department, and then we came and presented to the leadership group. And Tom Profit said, if you have one wish from this project, what would it be? And I said, a teaching writing course. I can't get it all in, 15, 16 weeks, or just, it's difficult to get it all in. And, to help them, be as prepared as they can be. And, when I think about how much I learned about teaching reading in a program that was just devoted to teaching reading, to take just a few courses, it just doesn't seem that, we're always doing it justice. And so I think for me, that's always my sense is, you want to send them out as prepared as they can be. And sometimes, the shifts that are happening here aren't necessarily happening at the same time as the school system or in a particular school. Now we've got schools running this, pilot or this pilot because everyone's sort of trying to figure out, where these changes are taking place and how they can best, move in that direction. And so I think that sometimes we're a little forward thinking here, and our interns are a little bit more ready almost in some ways than some of the schools that we're sending them into. Which is, a little frustrating because they hear it from us and they, we're not doing this here. Well, you will be, I promise. Hang on, you're, a little ahead of the game here. So, that's always a big juggle. But, education, the pendulum's always swinging. So I think it's something that's good for them to see, too, is that, what you're doing now, you'll do again in 15 years, and it's going to be called something different, and it'll be a little bit different. But, the good ideas tend to stick around. And
So for student teaching, they do 2 placements, 1 pre-primary,
1 pre-primary, 1 primary, 8 weeks each. The hope in the PDS is that they go back to one of the, hopefully both of the same mentors that they worked with in their 1 day a week experiences. Sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. But
that's nice continuity if you can make that happen.
Absolutely, and especially with action research and some of those kinds of things where they've been in a building long enough to really look at the kinds of things that are working and where schools have a strength and where they have a need, and so that makes that piece a little more valuable if we can keep them all in the same place throughout the whole experience. So and a lot of them end up with jobs in those buildings. I have an intern at Dundalk that I didn't even realize was working there. And, I was coming up the hall the other day, up the stairs to, observe one of my, current interns, and she's coming down with it. I'm like, what are you doing here? She's like, this is my 3rd grade class. And, and I just didn't even realize she had gotten a job there. And she's perfect for that school. She's going to be great there. But, so, that's, it's nice for them because I think they stay there and they get those experiences. And principals are just looking at what they've learned, and value that so much. They're looking at them when they interview first. So it speaks a lot about the programs, I think, that we have here.
Is there anything specifically that we haven't talked about that you think is important to mention in terms of what you do now in teacher education and how we are preparing our students now?
I think part of it, because I still spend so much time in schools, whether it is with the PDS or with Children's Literacy Initiative, I feel, there's always this this sort of stigma that, we're here in our higher education building and not in touch with the people, in schools. And I really don't think that's the case, at least, for, the people that are teaching these curriculum courses in our department. And I know that we're working really hard to make that connection that, what you're doing here and what you're learning here is completely applicable and is going to, make you a better teacher when you are, in your internships and ultimately in your own classroom. And, and whether sometimes students have positive experiences in their field placements or not so much, those are all learning experiences. And I think that, just that connection with really trying to support them in the field. I had a principal tell me a few years ago that she doesn't have time to grow a teacher anymore. That once upon a time you could hire somebody who was new and put them with a strong team, and in a couple of years they would be holding their own, as far as that team. But, with the demands that, kids come in with and families and just things that are changing with curriculum and standards and assessment and all those good things, that, she doesn't have time to grow a teacher. And I think about that all the time, that, as our students need to be able to walk in and, there's always things that you need to know and that you don't know. In first year of any job is always, work. But I think, really trying to prepare them as much as possible for what they do in the schools. And, flexibility pieces and things like that just, some students haven't learned along the way yet. And I think that's probably the biggest thing for us here. And I see that connection a little bit more than, back in the day when I was in the program, and just that, not that I wasn't prepared, but that relationship between Towson and where I was, actually teaching, I think has really grown as a university. And I know being on the college council, those are things that we're talking about all the time, and really looking at our relationship, with the local school systems and how we're, supporting them, but also supporting our interns. And so I think that partnership between, I don't want to use MSDE, but between MSDE and higher education, I think has really, that focus has become a little stronger, over the years here.
So what kinds of things do you do with the staff, school faculty, teachers at the school? I mean, PDS, you were just suggesting that we sort of try to be more supportive of them.
And funding, it's funny because I just sent the TPIP report into CPP, earlier this week. And, funding is such an, and when I started this PDS, there was so much funding. And it was just wonderful because we could do all these great things. And some of it's come back, and there's things here and there, but, it's not what it was 9 years ago when I started. So now we're sort of juggling. We used to bring 500 kids onto campus, and, we called it college knowledge, and, they got the whole college experience, and they just absolutely loved it. Like now just getting those buses and paying for them is, is such an issue. And principals fortunately feel so strongly about that trip that they're helping to budget it, where before, that was something Hannah and I always tried to figure out. But I really think, looking at when we do strategic planning in the summer, one of the things for me was the evaluation checklist we were using for our interns. It just seems so antiquated. And, I had people who were doing as well, but coming out on top because of this, evaluation. And so I spent time with, the mentors and our principals this summer and said to them, look, this is what you're filling out. And I don't think that it's necessarily always, showing what our interns know or don't know. And, looking at things like that, like we sat down and, rolled up our sleeves and changed that evaluation. And I sort of did it without asking anyone in our department if they really thought it needed to be done. And so then I sent it out in an email and said, well, in our strategic planning, this is what we did. And I hope that, you're okay with this, but these are the thoughts that the mentor teachers had. And, when it went over, it was an overwhelming, thing with the department where they were like, oh my gosh, we should have done this, semesters ago. And so I think sometimes, the other day I was in a classroom and somebody was doing something with nonfiction. I said, oh, I got these great cards that I actually got from my child's fourth grade teacher last year. I was laminating them. And, I think just sharing information sometimes and looking at, as they're getting their staff development for things that are changing. Have you all done anything at the university level? And so sometimes it's not a big meeting, but, handing things to a teacher here or, next week we're going to be doing workshops on the importance of reading aloud, for parents during American Education Week. And, so I think just that real relationship between, I mean, sometimes I feel like I work in 5 different schools, but, you know, I think it's important for our students and, you know, and for the kids that they're teaching, because, you know, ultimately I think they are a little bit more prepared.
Absolutely.
You know, working with, you know, when the family literacy bag doesn't get returned, you know, that's going to be one in a million things that you're going to be chasing down over the course of your career as a teacher, you know, from families and parents. And, you know, sometimes our students don't come from some of the same, you know, demographic neighborhoods and things like that that, you know, where they're teaching. And so I think that's an important experience, you know, as well, to really be able to connect with families and children and, you know, make the most of those opportunities.
Given your career, what would you say to someone who was considering, what words of wisdom would you give to someone who's considering a teaching career?
You know, it's not easy. I think a lot of people look, and I'm a big fan of spending my summer at the beach. You know, I think a lot of people look at the profession, sometimes who aren't in the profession, that, you know, it's one of these, you know, these teachers, they don't work on the weekends and they don't work in the summer. And it's funny because I was talking with one of the first grade mentors in our PDS, and he said something that one day when he grew up, and I guarantee you he's probably been teaching for 30 years, one day when I grow up I'm not going to work in the summer. And I said, you know, it's only been the last 3 summers that I've really gotten, you know, a chunk of time off, and you know, and this is my 19th year teaching, you know, in whatever capacity. And so I think, you know, it's hard work, and you're not there for the job, but you're there for kids. And when I look at, you know, my own children and the teachers that have, you know, inspired them and made a difference in their education, and, you know, especially with middle school, and, you know, that you can see the teachers that are inspiring and motivating, because those are the classes that, you know, you're coming home and working a little bit harder, you know, on your homework. And it just, what an important role you play in the lives of children. I mentioned the project in Newark, New Jersey, for Children's Literacy Initiative. And, you know, I left a kindergarten classroom last year and was almost crying. And I don't think, you know, as I said goodbye to these kids at the end of the year. And that hadn't happened, you know, with a group of kids for me since I had my own, you know, my own class. I mean, there's interns here that are special, but, you know, that, you know, for me, it really just resonated why I've stayed in this profession as long as I have, you know, even in the different roles that I've taken, because, you know, I saw how important, you know, my role was in that classroom with these kids, how much it meant to them. And sometimes those rewards aren't always so quick. You know, you don't realize it, you know, that you have this real struggling class. And I was watching something on TV with Ben the other night, and it was The Voice. And one of the guys that's moving on, you know, in the contest said, I want to show my 8th grade teacher who told me I'd never amount to anything, that I'm going to amount to something. And Ben looked at me, he goes, wow, teachers actually say that? And I said, well, I hope not. But, you know, fortunately in his little short life, he hasn't had that experience. But, you know, that's not, you know, you want that, you know, experience to be positive. And I think, you know, I hope our interns walk away realizing how important their presence in that classroom is, and, you know, what a difference they can make for kids. And sometimes that difference, you don't even realize it till years later, but, you know, that it really is such an important, you know, profession and part of our society. And, you know, I mean, it's sort of the nucleus in my mind of how everything should run, you know, I mean, because really without schools and without good teachers and, you know, without kids who want to be here, you know, who's running the election campaign in 20 years, you know. I mean, so, you know, I don't know, for me, I can't think of, you know, doing something else. And I've been fortunate to sort of wear lots of different hats over the last, you know, couple of decades to sort of, you know, keep me in with little people in schools, but also, you know, professionally, you know, being here is you know, really been very rewarding, because I get to share what I do with the little people, you know, and how, you know, our students do the same. So, you know, it's a hard job. It's not an easy job. It's a never-ending job. You know, I'm always doing something at home. Always, you know, as an elementary school teacher, you never go to the grocery store and think, what do I need to buy? Or, you know, look at Dollar Tree. I mean, they've got a whole aisle now devoted to teachers. I mean, that's what's happened. So, it's a 24-hour constant profession, and, you need to be dedicated and work hard for it or toward it. And I think, if that's what you want to do, I think those are the students that, make the most out of this program. Very rewarding. Very. Absolutely. Letters I have hanging in my office of, from kids telling me, because of you I go back and reread, or because of you I use big word, million-dollar words like, adapt or whatever. Those are the kinds of things. Those moments are few and far between, but when you look back at them, you realize why you're here and why you chose to do what you're doing. So, here I am.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything else that you want to say?
I don't think so. I think you've asked. I feel like I've babbled, rambled.
It's your story. It's not babbling, it's narrative.
Yeah. It's just, it's funny because I'm sitting here looking out at Hawkins Hall as I'm, and it really is that, I guess what OC said, I've never left, and I really have stayed, in some capacity for the last 20 years. So I guess, really, it's just very unique.
It's happened to a number of us.
Yes, yeah, really. It's funny, Catherine, when she came to present yesterday, she's like, I love doing this. Do you think I'd be able to teach a class here? I started laughing. I said, that's how I got here, It was one class, one assessment course, and so, and I think that's, another piece that's very helpful for our students is that we have a lot of people from our schools and PDS that are coming back and, as adjuncts, and some of those courses are really, really special because of that expertise that, the teacher who's been working with the large group of you. Yeah, they just have that experience to share that sometimes is really meaningful for our students that, they're not always getting. So, yeah. So this has been fun.
Good. I think